It doesn't matter what the weather is, where you are. It's 26 degrees here in Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. Good morning and welcome to your daily dose of sunshine. I'm Maupe Ogun-Yusuf.
And again, I say, Maupe, we really have to christen that. Amaya Makide, good morning and welcome. Today is January 21. It's a Tuesday morning. And so much is happening in the country, Maupe.
Oh yes, Ayo, so much is always happening in the country. We'll be going to that shortly, but let's take you to this, this beautiful site that you might want to see. I think that making it work, though, will make it even more beautiful. We're going all the way to Katsina, northwest Nigeria, and showing you the Lambarimi windmill, which the state government has now promised to revamp. A message from the Ministry of Information and National Orientation released on the 1st of December 2024, so it was just last month, says that the Katsina state government intends to revamp this particular windmill, which was started in 2005 by former and late President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, who happened to have come from Katsina state. This windmill, which you might be seeing the windmill farm, I think if you look a little closer, you will definitely see the windmills standing there in white. It was supposed to be a 10-watt windmill farm, which is supposed to add to the power generation capacity of Katsina state and also complement especially the agrarian, the agrarian economy in the state. But this is what we're seeing now, and thankfully there is a promise by the Katsina state government to revamp this particular project, and perhaps we'll eventually see it recommissioned or eventually commissioned. The completion of the project will be commissioned and eventually it will be put to use, because clearly a lot of money has gone into this infrastructure development already. Aya, your thoughts?
Well, it's the question we want to ask, Marco, is it viable? And I had this chance meeting with, Mr. Fashara, who was saying that, look, while he was power minister, he was looking at every opportunity to ensure that we had more electricity. And one of the questions that he had to put forward is this a viable project? Do we have enough wind in this particular area to sustain this infrastructure, these investments over time? Marco, it's exactly 20 years this year, or rather it will be 20 years this year, that this issue that you talked about, this project that you did, as you mentioned, since 2005, that's 20 years away. So one of the questions that I asked, and I'm still asking is, wouldn't it have been better to be a solar field as opposed to a windmill farm? I don't know. What do I know really? But the north is known to be, rather hot, at least much hotter than, maybe the south. And my mind goes to, I forgot the name of this solar farm was it in China? Very, very wide expanse of land like this one. So I'm just wondering if it is something viable, if the state government is really looking to make it work, if the wind speed is fast enough to sustain the intention, or do we want to consider other opportunities that we can put this to? Otherwise, it's only a matter of time before we come and say the same thing. So it's a good thing that at least the state government is considering revamping the project, but it might be wiser for us to rethink the entire process and be sure that indeed it is going to be a wise investment in the long run. 20 years ago we started talking about this, and we're still talking about revamping it. I don't know about where, but maybe time will tell.
Well, I think where there is hope right now, Ayo, is the fact that it is the Katsina state government that is thinking about taking on this particular project. Don't forget, that project was initiated while President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua was president of Nigeria. Sometime in 2000, no, beg your pardon, he was still governor. He was still governor of Katsina State when this project was initiated. We understand that there were a few security breaches here and there, contractors being kidnapped, and a few things stalling the eventual completion of the project. You asked if it was feasible. I want to imagine that they would have done that feasibility study before they decided to take on this sort of project. And for all you can see, if there's anything the North is also known for, apart from it being very hot, you can see the land stretches for as far as the eyes can see. And as such, it will be also ideal for wind turbines like this, because you also get a lot of wind coming from the north. Let's not forget that the harmattan, which we're currently experiencing in different parts of the country in varying degrees, usually comes from the northern part of Nigeria. So yes, this was just supposed to be one of those mixes that we'll have. We can always have solar fields, and I think a number of states have invested in that, but this was also supposed to be perhaps an experiment to see, just how viable it will be. But sadly, almost 20 years after, 2 decades after, we're yet to see the completion of this particular project. But now that the Katsina State government has said they're going to intervene and get it started or get it completed, so to speak, let us hold them to their word and hope that perhaps this year, as it does look like the project has gone very far, perhaps this year they could be cutting the tape at the commissioning of this 10-watt windmill project at Lambarimi. Well, let's take a break now, Ayo. It would have been good to talk about legislators and the budget defense currently going on at the National Assembly, which is gradually coming to an end. But this new topic, not a new topic, but it'll be very interesting to also get the thoughts of our analysts who are already on standby waiting for us on the inauguration of President Donald Trump, and whether they also share the view that perhaps that was let's not preempt them, what they made of the inaugural address. I was listening to Professor Bolaji Akingemi yesterday, who said that was the worst inaugural address he had ever heard. But let us also get the perspective of our guests and see what they have to say. We will take a break. I'll be back shortly. Please stay with us.
The golden age of America begins right now. From this day forward, our country will flourish and be respected again all over the world. We will be the envy of every nation, and we will not allow ourselves to be taken advantage of any longer. During every single day of the Trump administration, I will very simply put America first. Our sovereignty will be reclaimed. Our safety will be restored. The scales of justice will be rebalanced. The vicious, violent, and unfair weaponization of the Justice Department and our government will end. And our top priority will be to create a nation that is proud, prosperous, and free. America will soon be greater, stronger, and far more exceptional than ever before. I return to the presidency confident and optimistic that we are at the start of a thrilling new era of national success. A tide of change is sweeping the country, sunlight is pouring over the entire world, and America has the chance to seize this opportunity like never before. But first, we must be honest about the challenges we face. While they are plentiful, they will be annihilated by this great momentum that the world is now witnessing in the United States of America. As we gather today, our government confronts a crisis of trust. For many years, a radical and corrupt establishment has extracted power and wealth from our citizens while the pillars of our society lay broken and seemingly in complete disrepair. We now have a government that cannot manage even a simple crisis at home, while at the same time stumbling into a continuing catalog of catastrophic events abroad.
Well, two gentlemen join us to have conversations around this morning. You remember that song? Those of you who know it, Mark Morrison, Return of the Mark. Well, this is Return of the Trump, you say? Anyway, let's have conversations around this with two gentlemen. How would Trump's presidency impact Africa's economy? What should Nigeria, particularly as a country, expect? Mr. Samuel Adeyemi joins us this morning. He is Nigeria Regional Lead, Atlanta Black Chambers. He's right here in the studio with me. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have joining us virtually Bayo Oluwake, who is a Global Affairs Analyst. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mr. Oluwake.
Good morning, everyone.
All right, let me begin with you, Mr. Adeyemi. Return of the Trump. I'm sure you probably anticipated something like that will happen at some point. Yeah. What's your take?
Okay, I call it Trump 2.0. So I think for Africa, it's going to be the best time for us to thrive.
Oh, really?
Yes. So, okay, before I go there, it will interest you to know that a lot of our people, Nigerian Americans and African Americans, voted for Trump. I was attending a conference in the US during the election, and I was tapping opinions among Black Americans, among Nigerians, and though some were against him, a lot of Nigerians, Black Americans, some just say that they are just abstaining, they are going to vote. But I saw a lot of blacks voting for President Trump.
What do you think was their thinking?
Well, they believe that he's the one that can bring back the economic glory of Africa, because most people vote for their purse, they vote for economic liberation. So back to Africa, I believe this is the best time for us to thrive, in the sense that President Trump is going against some of the biggest economy in the world. He's going against China. He has threatened to impose 60% tariff on China, 25% on Mexico, and on Canada. Now, a lot of manufacturing jobs, companies, they'll be coming back to America. And these guys, they need more materials. And that is time for them to now focus on Africa.
Well, Mr. Oluwake, let me begin with with you. Let me take on his speech. I mean, if you look at it, there isn't any specific statement made about whether or not Africa will have any benefit. But what's your take on that speech of President Trump?
Well, thank you. I actually took my time to listen to the entire speech. And I believe that President Trump's inaugural speech brought back memories of what happened in 1823 under President Monroe. You will recall that President Monroe had some significance for Africa because he provided a ship that brought back freed slaves who wanted to go to Liberia. And in appreciation of that, they named the capital after him, which is Monrovia, named after President Monroe. In 1823, President Monroe proclaimed what he called the Monroe Doctrine, which restricted America's foreign policy focus to the areas surrounding the United States, Canada, Mexico, and areas around there. And he declared that area of essentially emphasized American, if you like, not sovereignty, but some sort of an American protection there. I think the liberal exceptionalism also related to that doctrine. But essentially why I'm citing this is because if you listen to President Trump, everything he said was about the United States, and also like President Monroe did in 1823, President Trump seemingly has restricted America's foreign policy focus to North America. He even said things like taking over the Panama Canal and then renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. He didn't say anything about the rest of the world. He didn't talk about Europe. He didn't talk about Africa. although he did mention China. So it was a speech meant to focus directly or to address Americans alone, so to speak, and perhaps to serve notice to the rest of the world that this is going to be his area of priority.
Very interesting. And, when you also look at it, I mean, looking at that speech, just as you highlighted, one of the major things that he also talked about is, look, we're going to protect America as much as we can. I quote in part, we'll reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. That's an audacious statement.
It is audacious, but it is also contradictory. Because if President Trump says he's not going to engage in new wars, he will rather end existing wars, then it boggles the mind how he intends to eradicate fundamentalism completely without actually committing U.S. troops. Of course, he can provide weapons, he can provide training, he can provide other resources, but it will be difficult for him not to deploy U.S. troops. You will recall that when he became president in his first term, the first African president he invited was Nigeria's President Buhari. And at that time, Nigeria had been acquired a Super Tucano aircraft, which President Obama refused to sell to Nigeria. But when President Trump became president, he immediately ordered the sale of the Super Tucano aircraft to the Nigerian Air Force. And he actually instructed that the exact model being used by the United States Air Force should be the ones to be sold to Nigeria, so Nigeria could combat terrorism. So in a way, he could do similar things by providing equipment and resources. But I feel that he may have to commit troops, and that might be contradictory to his position of not wanting to start new wars.
Interesting. But Mr. Riem, do you agree with Mr. Owake?
Yes, I agree. Now, the thing is, Trump is pro-business, and we have a president in Nigeria that also pro-business. It's not pro-welfare, like somebody mentioned earlier this morning on your show. It's pro-business. They will understand each other. So this is the best time for African countries to put their hearts together. You are not going to approach Washington with aid mindset, but with a trade mindset. That is the way we can be able to get the best of President Trump in these 4 years. But once we start going to Washington with begging and start to beg, it will not work. There are a lot of, during the first time of President Trump, he introduced Prosper Africa. And Prosper Africa is a platform that brings together all the US agencies under one umbrella to promote trade across the continent. And now, in between, when President Biden went to Angola, he mentioned that they are building a rail line between Congo DR to Zambia, from Zambia into Angola, so that the mineral resources can easily be shipped to the west instead of what China is doing now. So I believe the President Trump is going to bring a lot of policy that will favor Africa. I believe so. Only if we get our acts together and approach it with the trade.
Talking about getting our acts together, Africa has to have something to offer. I don't know the number of times on this program in particular that we have talked about Nigeria's exports being returned. Yes. Because of one reason or the other. Yes. And it's all about, for the United States of America, it's all about standards. You don't meet the standards, you don't even get in the country in the first place. Unlike, unfortunately, our own end, where it seems like and just about anything can come in, even though we have systems in place to check that. So Africa has to have, not just have something to sell, but have something at a particular minimum standards of the United States of America to sell.
Yes. In fact, I'm sure you know that some people will take Nigerian yam into Ghana and then repackage it and send it to the US. Now, Africa, Nigeria, we need to put our hearts together. We need to, Africa, this is time for AFTA to work. The government of America has an agreement with AFTA Secretariat, this is the time to make it work. These artificial boundaries that we are putting on our border needs to go. Even we ourselves, Nigerians, we are putting borders for ourselves between Badagry roundabout to Seme border. And nobody told me. I saw it myself. I counted the number of checkpoints. Well, I think that was 2023. I counted almost like 40 checkpoints. I'm not joking. You can fact check. You can ask those that have passed through those places. I don't know the past 1 year. I'm talking about 2023. I counted 40 checkpoints between Badagry roundabout to Seme border. Not from Maitu. I'm talking about Badagry roundabout to Seme border. Almost like 40 checkpoints. Immigration, Nigerian police, Nigerian army, all the Nigerian agencies, they were right there. So this is the time to make sure that after work, if after will be the biggest, this fact is the biggest free trade, agreement. If we are able to make it work, President Trump will see the value in Africa, and then he was going to, discuss business, not the way we are going about it now.
Okay, Mr. Lowake. Trump is pro-business. Our president is pro-business. Do you see that really promoting Nigeria's economy in any significant way?
To start with, when President Trump was in office in his first term, U.S. trade with Africa averaged $7 billion every year. So for those 4 years, it was $7 billion. It was about the same thing that was maintained throughout Biden's presidency. So we haven't really seen any upsurge, in the volume of trade, especially when you consider the volume of trade of many African countries with, say, China, for example. So I think the U.S. President Trump will have to do a lot more if he intends, it's not just us as Nigerians or us as Africans. I agree completely with what my colleague has said, that we need to do a few things. But at the same time, even the US has to do a lot. Because let's not forget that China, as at December 31st, 2024, China declared a foreign exchange surplus of $1 trillion US. There's no country on earth with any liquidity close to that. So the US has a lot to do, especially if President Trump seeks to revive American industry, to bring them to the level of compatibility or competitiveness that the Chinese have. An American expert said recently that the number of ships built in China in 1 month is the same number of ships built in the United States in a year. So that tells you that there's a lot of work for President Trump to do. But talking about Nigeria, during the inaugural speech of President Trump, he clearly stated that the US will begin to explore all oil reserves. He also mentioned that he was not going to encourage electric vehicles, and that he had to do this to pay back the United Auto Workers who stood solidly with him. That is a very, very strident call for a country like Nigeria. Although the US doesn't buy our oil as much anymore, but it tells us something, because if the US really goes ahead to do what President Trump said, the oil market may be flooded, prices may crash. Okay, that's the first lesson for us, which we have to prepare for. Now, secondly, to take advantage of President Trump, the Nigerian government has to think on its feet. And here I am going to repeat what I've said several times. The Nigerian Institute of International Affairs and the Nigerian Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies, these are government think tanks. Since we returned to civil rule in 1999, the political elite have not been making judicious use of these government think tanks. In fact, the military make better use of these think tanks. The activist foreign policy of Nigeria in the anti-apartheid days had a lot of input from the NIA. So what am I saying? The government has to use these think tanks and rely less on politicians. These guys are already paid by government to think for government. And I advise that government should make very good use of them in order to come up with policies and strategies that can position us to take advantage of the Trump presidency.
That's a very, very strong one, because I've often, wondered why it seems like we don't have a kind of a policy think tank for politicians who are going to occupy these seats. Because some would say, look, if we were able to do that, we would probably have better thinkers in the National Assembly and the State House of Assemblies.
Yes, that is why advocating and also calling on the president to appoint career diplomats as Nigerian ambassadors, not politicians. Because career diplomats, these guys are trained, they know what to do, they know how to, go about this thing, they know how to do it. So the president must, approach career diplomats. And then also, we must understand, like I mentioned, that this president is out to do business. It's no more business as usual. Like what you said, one of the promise of President Trump is to crash the energy bill of Americans. What that means is that it's going to flood the international market with oil, and the price of oil will go down. So we need to start thinking on our feet. We need to start thinking of non-oil exports outside of Nigeria. You understand? So this is the age of thinkers. And I agree with him. This is time for us to have thinkers, people that are trained and not just career politicians.
But he listed some institutions or soft infrastructure or even hard infrastructure we have for that thinking.
Yes.
But then is there a resoluteness on our part to go that route? Because NIPS, for instance, would have been a fantastic school of politics, if we can use that term. So it's not just an all-comers affair. I mean, you are recruited, even though the constitution, prescribes that you have to have this basic minimum academic education. But your job is to think. Then you should have some kind of think tank school. Do you think we have the will to position Nigeria like that?
I don't think we have the will now, but I think the will can come. There is a lot of interest in the Nigerian market, a lot of interest. I talk to a lot of black Americans, a lot of African Americans, a lot of people coming into Nigeria. 30 December is an example. You will see what is going to happen this December because of what has happened on social media. Even before then, there is a lot of
payback with full, backlog of payments being given to them. I do not know, when we see more, withdrawals, do you think we're going to see more withdrawals like this first from the United States? Because this is very significant. A withdrawal from the World Health Organization. The president believes that the United States has been taxed unfairly and that China has not exactly been pulling its weight. He also feels that the World Health Organization aided China in misleading the world about the origins of COVID. You remember that President Trump always referred to the COVID virus as the Wuhan virus. I don't know if we'll see many more withdrawals like this, or perhaps more passive, participation from the United States in terms of, organizations that have to do with multilateralism, for instance, the United Nations.
Yes, Marco, you're spot on. I think we should expect that. And there are two dimensions, to the U.S. Withdrawing from multilateral bodies. The first is that the US is the largest funder of so many of these multilateral bodies. So when the United States pulls out, those bodies suffer some financial handicap, because for some of them, the US gives as much as 25% of their budget. And interestingly, the US doesn't even make noise about that. So that's going to be the first major problem for some of these multilateral bodies. Now, in some ways, it could be a blessing in disguise, because it might force some of those multilateral bodies to put on their thinking caps and to look at areas where there are wastages, and then to block those gaps. Because again, there could be some wastages in some of these, multilateral bodies. So when the US pulls out, usually it forces them to think and to find how to close the gap. The second thing is that when the US pulls out, some of its expertise is also lost, because the US has a lot of scientists, has a lot of research institutes, that make a significant contribution to the effectiveness of these bodies. So when the US is not participating anymore, then we lose the intellectual resources that were otherwise available, in helping these bodies to function and to be more impactful. Now, not everything about the US withdrawal is negative. And I give you a quick example. In his first term, President Trump complained significantly about how the European countries were spending a minute part of their GDP on defense. And he was angry, that they left the United States alone to carry the card. To me, at that point, I thought he was being brash. When the Russian-Ukraine war began, and we began to see statistics, even from Western sources, that were very pro-Ukraine, as to the fact that the military-industrial complex in the Euro-Atlantic sphere cannot match Russian production. For example, Ukraine complained once that the shells being given, the anti-tank and artillery shells being given to her to use in one day for a month, is actually what Russia fires in a day. And then it brings back the position of Trump in his first term, that these countries have completely reduced defense spending. And correspondingly, as we can now see from the Ukrainian conflict, they have also reduced military production to the extent that it is doubtful if they can catch up with the Russians. So to some extent, some of those positions that Trump takes, we might just look at them and say he's grandstanding. But in reality, some of them make sense. But I think withdrawing from the WHO and from some key multilateral bodies is certainly not the best thing to do. Rather, I think it also contributes to weakening the influence and the power of the US, which President Trump, interestingly and paradoxically, now wants to show off.
Well, it's very interesting that you bring that up. Some people will say perhaps it's also, depicting the area that the foreign policy of the European Union had, started to look at. Maybe they did not think that they could be fighting physical wars like that. I mean, like the scale we have seen between Russia and Ukraine. But let me go to our other guest, Mr. Adeyemi in the studios in Lagos, you have been pretty optimistic, Mr. Adeyemi, about President Trump being pro-business, and you think that it could certainly have a lot of upsides for us. But when you also think about the fact that we have a lot of our citizens, in the United States, and we also have, a lot of people who want to go to the US, I don't know if you see any. I don't know, when you were looking at the speech, if you saw any downsides, was there anything in the speech that, put up a warning sign for you that, oh, look, our people, we need to be careful around here?
Yes. Unfortunately, a lot of our people that might be planning to, process maybe immigrant into the US might be affected. And of course, those that are out of status, a lot of Nigerians, a lot of Africans are out of status in the US. Unfortunately, they may be caught, in this war in code that the President Trump is about to embark on to deport a lot of people that are in the country. Of course, that is the unfortunate part, but I think President Trump needs to rethink that policy, because Nigerians are one of the best brains in the US, and I believe that the United States of America needs this best brain to develop and achieve President Trump's vision for America.
The parts of the speech, now I was looking at it, it says America will be a manufacturing nation once again, and we have something that no other manufacturing nation will ever have, the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we're going to use it. Obviously making reference to the climate action deals, etc., which is supposed to be trying to decrease the use of fossil fuels. But there is a reason why China was now the place where a lot of people do their production, why China had become the darling for production. Even Nigeria does more trade with China than it does with the United States. What is your reading of this thrust by America, this push by President Donald Trump to make America a manufacturing nation once again?
Yes, so that's where I mentioned that, this is where we are going to have opportunities as Africans. So because if a lot of production is going back into the US, is bringing a lot of production back into the US, the president, America will focus on Africa to get their raw materials, to get a lot of things to power their industry. They are going to focus on Africa. So this is the time for us now to start thinking of, where is the best way to now, position. Of course, like I mentioned also in the area of tariffs and all that, the focus will also be on Africa, on the platform of AGOA. Unfortunately, AGOA is going to expire in September. I pray and hope that it's going to be extended after September 2025, and also on the platform of Prosper Africa. There will be a lot of trade that will go on that platform. So it's now built on us as Africans, as Nigerian government, to start looking at this platform to see how to be able to, to take advantage of all these things. So I was telling some people that, if you want to read the mind of President Trump, just follow what he's tweeting on social media. That will give you an idea of where the money is going to. The way he's tweeting is going to cause a lot of disruption in the stock markets. A tweet can bring down a company's stock. A tweet can bring up a company stock. So it's now for the Nigerian presidency, for African countries to look at all this policy that the President Trump is bringing on board and be able to see how they can position. I don't believe the President Trump wants to impose 20% tariff on African countries, because I'm sure they are even trying to counter China's influence in Africa, Russia's influence in Africa. They are trying to do that. So I don't think they want to bring anything other thing that will make them to lose totally in Africa.
Well, let me ask Professor Oluwake, do you see that? I mean, for a country that is looking so inwards, do you see them trying to counteract any influence of China in Africa?
It's an uphill task for the US. You see, the US does have technology. There's no argument about that. The problem is when the US produces, what is the cost? The country that has the highest technology in the world is Germany. But Germany is not in the market because German things are extremely expensive. And what the Chinese and all the other countries, in Asia, like South Korea, like Singapore, what all these countries have as an advantage, even to some extent India, is that they produce most of these items at affordable cost. And they can even give you alternatives. If you are unable to afford the very high-end version, they give you an alternative which will not last you as long as that high-end version, but at least it will keep you going, And so unless the US can come up with this kind of strategy, it's going to be extremely difficult. And don't forget that the Chinese have been at this for years now, okay? And they're not just producing consumer items. They are into construction. It is almost impossible for any company in the Euro-Atlantic environment to compete with the Chinese construction company. So they have a head start. President Trump, I think, is going to succeed perhaps in laying a foundation for trying to catch up. And whoever comes after him can then build on that. But in 4 years, it's going to be extremely difficult.
Well, when I was speaking about influence, even though you've taken a question which I had for Mr. Adeyemi right out of my mouth, in terms of when you finally manufacture goods, because when the president refers to making America a manufacturing nation once more, there'll be questions as to who exactly is consuming the finished goods. Is it going to be Americans themselves, or do they have the mind to export? If they do, will people around the world be able to afford it? Because there's a reason why China had become the darling. China, and you also mentioned India, had become the darling for production, even for US companies and even for European companies as well. But I was talking in terms of soft power, in terms of influence, because Mr. Adeyemi was talking about, how they wouldn't want to lose out in terms of, the influence that the United States still has in many parts of Africa. And that they want to give China a run for their money. But looking at this speech and looking at how inwards is looking for America, and how, of course, the mantra for President Trump is make America great again. Do you think that they even have any mind to be in any sort of competition for influence with China?
Yeah, the speech was too, if I can say so, too introverted. Like it's like an introvert, someone who is an introvert who hardly mixes, yet wanting to carry so many people outside of his inner circle along. So I think that speech doesn't point to that direction. But perhaps the speech didn't say everything. The US had so many friends around the world when it had the Peace Corps. The US had so many friends around the world with the Peace Corps. But when there was a transition from soft power, leveraged through the Peace Corps, to hard power, building aircraft carriers, deploying them all over all the seas around the world, we began to see, the US still had influence, but it was through coercion. It was through coercion. I think, of course, the US needs both. And if perhaps President Trump can go back to reviving the Peace Corps and strengthening the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, then this will enhance the soft power of the US. Otherwise, this whole thing will, again, like I said earlier on, just rekindle what we had in the days of President Monroe.
Come to Mr. Adeyemi now. One of the things that you also mentioned Dirty December and the influence that Nigeria is beginning to will through its own, will I say through its own soft power. I mean, our entertainers are doing a fantastic job of marketing Nigeria to the rest of the world, and it would seem that Americans are showing interest in that. How do you think that is going to pan out now with this new? With President Trump in place, do you think that it's going to gain even greater influence, or do you think that we could be forced to now start paying tariffs to this external revenue service for what it is that we are exporting to the United States?
Okay, so I think there will be more interest in Nigeria. There is a lot of interest in Nigeria among white Americans, black Americans, because these people, they have a lot of Nigerian friends. They are on social media, they are seeing what we are doing. They have friends that are Nigerians that are, I was in the US last year, and I spoke with one mayor, and he was so interested in Africa. In fact, the speech he gave at the conference, he was saying, even telling Americans, you need to go to Africa. You need to go. In fact, he was in Ghana last week. You need to go to Nigeria. You need to go to Africa. This is where it is happening. There is a lot of interest. So I just want to call on President Trump to see this as an opportunity to, deepen the relationship between Nigeria and the US. And of course, make use of the expertise of Nigerian Americans. That's one of the ways they can penetrate Nigeria. There are a lot of influence that these people, the remittance to Nigeria, look at the volume. If the remittance of Nigerian American stops, you know what will happen to the Nigerian economy. So there will be a lot more interest in Nigeria if the president, and I'm sure the President Trump, because he likes to. So see what he did with TikTok. Why was TikTok allowed to remain? Because he saw there is an upsurge of support on TikTok among young people for his re-election. And then now, if he sees that, black Americans, Nigerian Americans, they are supporting him, he's going to also support them. And I think that support is there. In fact, let me give you one interesting, during that election, I saw a couple, Nigerian couple. The wife voted for Trump, the husband voted for Harris. And, that was like that. A lot of, same thing for black Americans. In fact, Harris had to do a special, almost like 2 weeks before the vote, he did a special, manifesto for black Americans just to get their votes. Unfortunately, he still didn't get it. And she still didn't get it. So the president needs to leverage on the expertise of Nigerian Americans. This is not the time to start imposing travel bans on Nigeria.
Are you looking forward to a Trump playlist that will have Nigerian music?
Yes, I'm looking forward to it.
I've never seen one. Just one quick one. I see that already, some of the statements, and this is one of the things that, that the first Trump 1.0 was known for, and that was some statements that were fact-checked and debunked over time. For instance, this so-called Green New Deal, there are those who are already saying it didn't exist, that the fact that China is using Panama or is running Panama, the Republic of Panama has owned it for as long as as one can remember. And then there is that statement of tariffs, there are loads and loads of money coming to America. There are those who say, look, it's just going to be a transfer. You increase tariffs, automatically the prices of the goods will increase. Are those significant? I mean, in global politics, even in the national politics, for someone as prestigious as President Trump, knowing that some statements he makes would be fact-checked and found to be inaccurate?
Good question, Ayo. The interesting thing is that his support base, they largely believe whatever he says. President Trump's, most of his support base, they believe whatever he says. Even if those things are fact-checked and it's found out that they were not true, they believe what he says. And if you hear them talking, they quote those things, wanting to set up a Department of External Revenue. You already have your Customs Service. There's a U.S. Customs Service. So what other external revenue are you creating? All of these, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I suspect, they are just designed to appeal to his support base. But if you allow me just quickly, I wanted to say something about the last question, which is how the creative economy. First, I want to commend President Bola Tinubu for creating a Ministry of Creative Economy. Now, those who have been given a responsibility in that ministry, in my humble opinion, I think they need to justify the confidence that the president has in them. There was Dirty December, which the gentleman in the studio referred to. How did the Nigerian authorities enhance and leverage Dirty December? Nigeria has all this huge music appeal around the world. In the days when reggae was dominant, reggae made a significant contribution to foreign exchange for Jamaica. The ABBA music group made a significant contribution to foreign exchange for Sweden, right? How is the Ministry of Creative Economy in Nigeria leveraging the enormous success that Nigerian artists have made internationally? These are questions that some of those who have been appointed by the president need to begin to answer, especially in order to be able to leverage opportunities that are coming, with people like President Trump coming to power and having to find some ways in which we can put forward those areas where there can be collaboration between the two countries in the arts or in the creative economy.
So then what then is missing, Mr. Oluwake?
The Ministry of Creative Economy is sleeping. I'm sorry to say that. All the things we see in Nigeria are the initiative of young people. Dirty December was the initiative of young Nigerians. The creative power and the ability to mobilize using the social media. And we have seen the impact of Dirty December on the economy of Lagos. Imagine Dirty December in Akwa Ibom. Imagine Dirty December even in Plateau State. Imagine Dirty December in Cross River. The Ministry of Creative Economy ought to be able to coordinate, ought to be able to provide diplomatic and technical support, ought to be able to enhance financial resources for those who operate within these seasonal economic opportunities, and let us feel their impact. So I feel that maybe they are still strategizing, but the time is right for them to begin to justify the confidence that the president has reposed in them.
What's interesting, Mr. Lowake, as you would remember, is that many times certain economies just evolve on us and then we seem to play catch up. One of them is the Okada business, for instance, tricycle and all of them. They just happened on us and we just seem to play catch up. I wish there was a way for us to forecast that some of these things, little things, is going to become something. Thankfully, Mr. Fashola has brought that to the fore. Anyway, thank you so much for your time this morning. Mr. Bayo Oluwake is a global affairs analyst, joined us virtually, as well as Mr. Samuel Adeyemi, who is Nigeria Regional Lead, Atlanta Black Chambers. Thank you again for your time this morning. Well, Mr. Adeyemi here said President Trump is into deals, and that's business. So let's take the next 30 minutes talking about that.
Well, hello and welcome to the Tuesday trade right here in Lagos, Nigeria. The market's about to open. Let's get a check on the top stories that set to agenda. Right now, we see for the FX market, it kicked off a quiet note yesterday with most participants staying on the sidelines. However, we noted early intervention from the CBN in the market, and we see NFM that closed marginally down 0.07%, 1,551 naira to the dollar. For the NAFEX window, there was a gain, a strengthening there of about 0.49%, closing at 1,554 naira to the dollar. Then CBN rate, that was unchanged yesterday's close. Let's get a check on the oil market now. We see oil prices they're down this morning as investors are taking stock of President Donald Trump's plan to apply new tariffs later than expected while boosting oil and gas production in the U.S. And we see Brent reacting now sub $80 for Brent, 0.29% drop. U.S. crude there, that's WTI, $77.24 a barrel, with a bigger drop of 0.82%. So we're still seeing investors there watching the body language there in the U.S. to see what plays out for the oil market. Are we going to get oversupply as predicted by the IEA? We'll definitely keep an eye on that. All right, so other stories now. Nigeria has regained its position as Africa's top oil upstream investment destination, surpassing Angola. That's according to a report from Wood Mackenzie. The firm attributes Nigeria's lead in 2024 to increased deep water projects and sustained activity in its offshore basins. Despite Angola's ongoing investment in major developments, Nigeria's success is also linked to the approval of key presidential directives and fiscal incentives, as noted by energy advisor to the president, President Bola Tinubu Olu Verheijen. Angola had previously held the top spot due to significant oil projects before exiting OPEC last year. We see the Nigerian Communications Commission has approved a 50% increase in telephone service costs, responding to telecom operators' call for a tariff review. The decision announced by NCC's Ruben Morka addresses current market conditions and operational challenges. The new rates are lower than the 100% hike some operators requested, comes 12 years after the last adjustment in 2013. And shareholders of Arik Air have disagreed with claims by the Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria, AMCON, that the owner of the carrier, Johnson Arume Hide, is owing the corporation over 445 billion naira. In a statement issued by spokesman Godswill Deloje, the shareholders described the debt claims as fictitious, adding that the allegation is defeated by AMCON's claim in its suit, which it took Arik Air into receivership and gained full control and management of operations, assets, and liabilities of the airline. They equally described as false AMCON's claim that Arik Air was insolvent and mismanaged before the receivership, according to a purported PwC report. The shareholders stated that the 2014 audited financial reports of the airline were completed and duly signed by the Arik management, while the 2015 management accounts were concluded and forwarded to PwC for auditing. All right, let's get to the conversation now. So much to unpack today with Mr. Bismarck Urwani, from PMS price hike to telecom companies getting the nod to raise tariffs. Good morning, Mr. Urwani. First off, let's start with PMS prices. Now we have a refinery, but it seems that the consumer can't escape higher prices in 2025. That's how it's looking. And I'm wondering, at this point, we're seeing tariff hikes, we're seeing PMS price hike. Is the consumer really king in Nigeria?
Consumer is king everywhere, but more so now in Nigeria. Why do I say this? I say this because in the past 2 years, we've gone from 198 naira a liter all the way to 1,050. And ever since it got to 1,050, the volatility has only been 4%, as against 215% in the last 1 year. In other words, the increases that we have seen in the last 1 month or 2 months have been within a band of 70 to 100 naira, as against when you had it at 400, 500 naira in the past. What does this mean? It means that basically what the Dangote refinery is saying is that there's been a 12% increase in the global price of oil, but they have absorbed 5%. Actually, they've absorbed 6% and passed on only 5% to the market. So what it really means is that there's fierce competition amongst the players, but also the regulators are keeping a very careful, keeping an eye on their activities to ensure that consumers are not gouged. In any case, if the consumers don't have the money to buy the product, then it's game over for the refinery business. So the refinery business, you must know, and every Nigerian must know, it's a high volume, low margin activity, which means that the more you sell, the higher your return. And if the price is too high, you will find definitely that it's not going to happen. So it's a welcome innovation, and let us not forget that the price was as high as 1,150. And if not for the competition and the fact that prices came down, the price across the coast of West Africa is something like almost 1,700 naira a liter. And it would have been about almost 1,250 a liter if not for the competition between NNPC and Dangote refinery and the modular refineries. So basically, I think the consumers are not getting a bad deal at all. There's quality guaranteed, supply guaranteed, but what is not guaranteed is that global volatility of prices is going to affect the consumer this time.
Right, and I get it that supply is great. You want to have ample supply. You don't want to see queues, at the stations. But at the end of the day, we know the consumers have been through a lot. Coming from 2024, dealing with high inflation, food inflation, and all of that. And now we're seeing oil prices. They were trending up, but now we're seeing oil prices sub $80. And we've seen how we've heard about once oil prices go up, PMS prices follow suit. So they have that direct relationship. So now that the prices are kind of subdued or going down, should we be happy at this point, thinking that fuel prices will stay stable? Because it seems they stay stable. They don't really go down when oil prices go down.
Yes, we expect prices, because the price of oil is now $79 and probably goes down to about 74 or 75. If that happens, definitely you will see a drop in the price of petrol at the pump and diesel as well. But what is interesting is that when the prices came down, we did not see any fall in transport fares. As a matter of fact, we noticed that initially when the price went up, we saw a fall in traffic, vehicular traffic along Adeola, Odepo, Ake Adeshola, and Ozumba and Badiwe. Now, after a while, the cars came back and the traffic built up again. What happened was that people had given up some other products to go back to their cars, and the traffic increased. But it's a kind of substitution effect that basically, when your income is constrained, you give up one product for the other. What people gave up, people probably gave up consumption of some luxury goods and started going back to their cars. But we have seen some efficient use of vehicles in Nigeria today. People are pulling, 2-3 people are pulling together to go to work and come back. We've seen people cut back on inefficient travel, and we've seen people actually begin to use public transport rather than use their cars. So basically, the country is becoming more efficient out of necessity rather than out of altruistic motives. I think that's very important. But important to know that if the price declines, it has a knock-on effect on inflation. And therefore, the whole idea that inflation will begin to moderate in the second half of this year, it's possible, depending on one, the global price of oil, two, the intensity of competition and rivalry amongst the operators, and the encouragement for the Dangote refinery to continue to invest. They're investing in so many things because it's just not about refining, it's about the entire value chain all the way to the outlets, and that's what's happening. We must take that into consideration.
Right, and from where you're sitting, Mr. Rani, do you think that at some point in 2025, the Nigerian consumer will be somewhat protected from profiteering. How do you think we can go about protecting the consumer in 2025? Because we know at the end of the day, disposable income is being hammered from all sides, even with, telecom tariff increase about 50%.
No, basically, I know what you're talking about. The consumer is embattled right now. One is inflation is at 35%. Is now going to pay 50% more for telcos, and it's going to pay more for petrol. But what happens is that the consumer is going to be getting more efficient service, and how it translates efficient service into productivity becomes a key issue. The initial reaction is that a 50% increase in the price in telco cost. They asked for 100%, they got 50%. They say half a loaf is better than none. As a matter of fact, the last time telco tariffs were reviewed was in 2013. So the cumulative rate of inflation between 2013 and now is over 170%. Therefore, if they get 50%, they're getting a third recovery. But quality of service is what matters more than anything else. The telcos are going to have to invest more, they're going to have to produce more, and one of the key elements, and that is the link between the Dangote refinery and the telcos, is that the price of diesel has stayed flat at about 1,050. It was as high as 1,700. So because you have over 120,000 base stations around the country, the major cost input for telcos is the price of diesel and power. So that has come down. The exchange rate has stayed stable within a band of about 10%, only about 100 and 150 naira change, which is about 10% of the 1,600, 1,700. So with exchange rate stability, with power actually, cost of power coming down, right? And with the tariff, you will find that it's win-win for one, the telcos, two, for the refineries, and three, for the consumer, because the consumer gets quality service, it gets constant quality supply of petrol and diesel, and quite frankly, initially there'll be a shock, but eventually everybody's better off. So it's a slow road to recovery, but the recovery is imminent, whether we like it or not.
Well, we're definitely looking out for that recovery. But I'd like to, get your thoughts on this. We know this value chain, the Nigeria's oil and gas industry is quite a huge value chain. But who do you think Nigerians can look to for some kind of succor that's going to look, for the interest, look more into the interest of Nigerians? Because we know business, everyone is out to make profit. But who do you think in this value chain can help us, keep prices stable?
No, I think actually at the end of the day, the inflation is caused by constrained output and productivity. If productivity is actually increasing and improving, then inflation stabilizes and inflation begins to moderate. If inflation moderates, then the quality of life and the standard of living of Nigerians begin to improve. That is not a journey that is going to take place in 3 months or 6 months. It's a trend. So what you look out for is the direction of inflation, the direction of prices. If you look at under commodity prices, we've seen commodity prices have actually dropped sharply in the last 2 weeks. Not because output has increased, but because people don't have the money to buy anymore. So there's consumer resistance, there's income erosion, and there's added to that is some productivity gains. When you add all of this together, you will now begin to see that the country begins to move in that direction. And investors now begin to invest now in capex, in recurring revenue, and more than anything else, the government itself has to be more efficient in the provision of services. Because government services, the agencies, the ministries have to become more efficient. It's not just about all talk and no action, but we must see the results.
Okay.
So I think that generally speaking, it's 2025 is looking better than 2024. Okay. But there's a lot of work to be done.
All right, let me bring you back to the tariff increase for the telcos. They have the nod now, 50%. Talk to me about the impact for inflation. And I hope it's not a case where if I want to buy something now, they'll tell me, tariffs have gone up, so my price has to go up.
No, I don't think the knock-on effect is not that direct. don't forget that for between 2013 and now, there has been no increase in tariffs. The point is that what is going to happen is that under the tax reform that the telcos are able to immediately claw back their taxes. So there'll be a reduction in their tax paid. There'll be a reduction in the time difference between when they incur the taxable income and when they pay it, and they're able to pass this on to the consumers. So because of the competition between Airtel, MTN, Glo, and others, one, two, because the exchange rate is stable, so with these transaction losses and translation losses are going to be reduced. But what is going to happen that in 2025, I think that the telco companies are going to be profitable operationally for 1 year, but they will not be able to claw back all the losses of the past in 1 year. So you will see improved performance, you will see them declare profits, you will see them declare dividends, I think, and then you begin to see the productivity gains that are associated with a sustainable telco sector. Because with a profitable and sustainable telco sector, then security, drone technology, security begins to improve. And once security improves in the oil producing area, in the agri belt, the knock-on effect of that for Nigerians is going to be dramatic. So we need to pay this price now, so that, like they say, no gain without pain. This is a pain period, but the pain has to be equitably and equally shared, both by the private sector, the consumers, and more than anything else, the government. The government cannot live in splendor when others are suffering. I think.
All right. I hope after all the pain, at some point, the consumer, I guess, a fat, disposable income
and consumer will be the
muscles.
The consumer will be the king. Okay. Becoming the king.
All right. Hoping for the very best. Thank you so much, Mr. Bismarck Rwanda. Always great to get your perspective on the show. Thank you. We'll take a break now. When we come back, more conversations. Cross-border payments. That's next. Just stay with us. Welcome back. Well, as the world becomes increasingly interconnected, cross-border payments are playing a vital role in facilitating global trade and commerce. Nigeria, with its growing economy and increasing participation in international trade, is no exception. Let's explore the outlook and trends shaping the future of cross-border payments in Nigeria and what this means for businesses and individuals. Joining me for this conversation, I have Mr. Dumebi Obodo, the MD, Cham Switch, joining me right here in the studio. It's great to have you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
Right. So,
nice to meet you.
Happy new president. That's in the U.S. And definitely we know that his policies, that's Donald Trump's policies, will have an impact, when it comes to cross-border trade and all of that. So what are you expecting, when it comes to cross-border payments and how Nigeria interacts with, other countries in settling most of these transactions?
Thank you very much, Ladi. Our expectation is that nothing new from a Trump presidency is America first. It's all about America. But all said and done, Nigeria will be expecting a boom, right, in remittances that will have an effect on the cross-border payments. With the diversification of the economy by the current administration, evidenced by the current budget that was just passed, we expect an increase in cross-border payments. With the technologies coming on board, cryptocurrencies, blockchain and the likes, and the rate of adoption, and considering that Nigeria also is one of the youngest countries in the world, the median age is about 18, so rate of adoption is higher. So these people don't even need any kind of training. They just figure things out themselves. Smart.
But is blockchain not some kind of competition, at this point? Because we know for blockchain, it takes out the middleman. So you can send out, maybe through one of these blockchain platforms, you can send out $1 million for that'll cost you less than a cent.
Yes.
Without a middleman. You're just doing that, across the blockchain. Is that competition, or does it complement, the kind of transactions you do?
It depends on the way you look at it, right? One thing you can't stunt is technology. It has come to stay. So just find regulations that will ensure that everybody is protected. And that's why we're talking about finding ways that collaborations with regulators, with governments, and with the players. You just can't stop technologies like that. They will keep coming up. So you just keep finding ways you can protect the people, ways you can take out issues around anonymity, ways you can ensure that there's confidence in the system. But in terms of technology coming on board, it will come on board. It will always be used by different people.
We've had, conversations recently about the great de-dollarization. We've seen some countries talk about, trying to transact in other currencies, aside the US dollar. But we know Donald Trump is about America first, US dollar first. So would you say other currencies, for transaction settlements, have you seen a trend, maybe in 2024, that, some currencies are actually popping up other than the US dollar?
There's a trend in the BRICS. I think Nigeria just got admitted in the BRICS. We see that, yes, there's the trend, right? But I believe the US dollar will strengthen because of Donald Trump. But at the same time, Donald Trump, being very smart, has also gotten pro-crypto guys as advisors. So he knows that is the way to compete against the rest of the world, apart from his policies that we all know that he will come up with. So we believe that there will be it's an interesting time.
So it seems some kind of balancing act, keeping the dollar as the reserve currency, but he's also exploring.
Absolutely. It makes a whole lot of sense, because you can't be doing the traditional thing all the time. Technology has a way of disrupting things. So the best way is to get ahead of the technology, run with the technology, and also possibly get ahead of it. Position yourself policy-wise, position yourself infrastructure-wise, and ensure that you don't get caught off guard.
Right, and talking about trade, now we know obviously the AFCFTA, Nigeria somehow started taking advantage of that trade bloc in 2024. How would you describe payments through that platform? Have you seen more value or volume of trades coming through AFCFTA?
Absolutely. The volume and velocity of payments will definitely increase. Currently, the AFTA, I think, is operational in about 10 countries. Djibouti, Namibia, Nigeria are quite a good number of countries. And good thing is that beneath AFCFTA, there's PAPS, Pan-African Payment Settlement System, to take care of issues around different currencies and the likes, conversion and the likes. So currently they are partnering with one of the major banks in Nigeria and ensuring that all the issues around settlement and around exchange rates are not taken care of. So the volume and velocity of payments will definitely increase.
Right, and definitely with the Trump presidency, it seems everyone is bracing for some kind of trade war.
Absolutely.
With China. So do you see a trend where maybe Africa starts to trade with Africa more? With all of these solutions, coming up for payments and, settlements of different currencies?
Absolutely. I expect Africa to be a lot more united this time around, leveraging the AFTA and the PAPS platforms, a lot more united, a lot more focused. It's always been said Africa can only be developed by Africa. And then, of course, trade with those who have your interests, right? If China is bringing the funds and bringing the infrastructure, which we believe the BRICS platform provides, and why not play with them? So we believe that this is the best time to further push the AFTA initiative, riding on PAPS, right? This is the best time to trade with your friends, basically.
Right, and in trading with your friends, would you say African countries are more receptive of other currencies within Africa? Like take, for instance, a Ghana-Nigeria trade now. A Ghanaians receptive of the Naira, you know, with all of these platforms coming up?
It's not so much about being receptive of the Naira. For now,
exactly.
with PAPs, basically is to take care of from a technological standpoint, take care of the concerns around losing money. You know what I mean? Around losing money. So if you are exchanging by 1 Naira to 2 Naira, right? All that has been taken care of from a technology standpoint. So as you're sending, you're not, they will tell you this is the rates and this is what you get at the end of the day. So that gives some level of confidence. It's not something you resolve in a single engagement, but today it's working. But of course, further engagements are also ongoing to make sure more African countries come on board.
Right, and you know, definitely when it comes to payments, we've seen technology sometimes, you know, kind of falter, especially when we see, you know, trades within the country, you know, at this point. So, you know, looking at 2025, are you seeing more technology, you know, popping up? You know, even looking further into 2026, are we getting to a point where settlements will be done immediately?
Absolutely. Currently, Nigeria does instant payment, right, through the NIPS platform, and we believe that there will be a lot of collaboration between the different central banks and working on the AFTA initiative. The PAPS good thing is powered by Afrexim Bank, right? So we believe there will be a lot of handshake across the different central banks, working in synergy to ensure that instant settlement issues are taken care of. But I think it's a gradual thing because each country is a sovereign nation. Therefore, there has to be some engagement. It will take a bit of time to sort out all the issues around instant settlements or no instant settlement or near instant settlement.
Right, and we also have that issue about remittances. You know, some say, you know, when you get, you know, remittance from out there, from your people abroad, it's converted immediately to Naira. You know, so how you see all of that? Yeah,
well, it varies from country to country. Depending on the need of the particular leadership, the drivers of the economy. If they deem it fit at the particular point in time that this is the way to go in order to show up, maybe to manage the dollar demand. Exactly, to manage demand, right? They can create incentives around them, right? And say, okay, this is what you get.
Okay.
Maybe in the parallel market, this is the rate and things like that. That could be different incentives, just like the government in the time past provided some incentives for folks who want to remit. Right?
All right. So much to unpack there. A lot to look out for when it comes to cross-border payments. Thank you so much, Dumebi Obodo, MD, Cham Switch, for sharing your thoughts with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right, so the markets are open. We'll give you a snapshot of what's playing out. That's at 1 p.m. on Business Incorporated. That's it from me on Business Morning. I hand things over to the Sunrise Daily team.
Well, thank you very much, Ladi. We are discussing a little more business now because at the beginning of this year, we saw the rounds made by the MD, or like I said, the CEO of MTN Communications, you know, speaking generally about what the position of the telecoms industry was going to be and how they were going to be needing a 100% tariff increase, or at least there had to be an increase of some sort in that particular sector, arguing that, you know, tariffs had largely remained same since 2013, yet cost of operations had been going up. And so we knew that something was in the offing for consumers of telecom services. Well, it's now come to play. The NCC, the National Communications Commission, has now approved a 50% tariff increase. What will that mean for you and I? I know almost every single Nigerian now has a telephone, a mobile telephone in his or her hand. Now, if you're not even using a mobile telephone network, sometimes they're consumers of data. How is that going to impact the consumer and the consumption of telecom services? Joining us this morning to discuss it is Mr. Bosun Ayeni, who is the CEO of Compumetrics, and he joins us via Zoom. Mr. Ayeni, it's good to see you this morning. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mope. Thank you for having me. Good morning.
So they asked for a 100% increase, but we're granted a 50% increase. Do you see this, how do you see this playing out for both the operator and consumers as well? Do you think this is a good enough middle ground?
Of course, thank you, Mope, for that question. Of course, the telcos will take it. Middle ground for the operators and the regulator, but certainly not a middle ground for consumers. As you know, Nigeria is the whole of 2024 passing through a lot of economic situationship that the government is working really hard to reverse and make things more comfortable for the citizens. I mean, from multidimensional poverty to all the indicators. So this would be another nail. We just hope it's not the final nail to the coffin and all the nails will go off at some point. But for consumers, it will be more cost, more flashing, more could you send me airtime and all of that. So that will play out for the consumers. But for the operators, yes, it's a demand that's justified in a way, because if you look at the situation, 10 years, 12 years is a long time to keep costs at the same level in Nigeria. But it's not unusual in telecom services. There are so many factors that will determine whether an increase should come in. But in Nigeria, and given what has happened, especially in the last 24 months, definitely something has to give. Most of the cost inputs, and if you look at the books of these operators, they are sweating cash. A lot of them are declaring losses, and a lot of it is coming from loans, debt, and foreign exchange losses. So if you look at MTN books, for example, it's on their website. MTN, as at September 2024, has declared a 900 billion naira loss due to exchange rate. 900 billion. All the states in Nigeria, their IGR in 2023 is 22.4 trillion. So, and the entire IGR of Lagos State, the entire for the whole of 2023 is 800 billion, 815. So the losses that MTN alone has incurred from FX in 2023 and 2024 as at September is more than what Lagos State has sent in Nigeria. So something has to give. The telcos would make a demand. The regulator would look at it. But there are other perspectives on the regulator side as well. Yes, middle ground. Yes, you shift. And we have to take the argument of the regulator on face value. It's been a long time coming. They've held out for quite a long time. But certainly acceding to the request now is something they also have to do. Of course, the argument have been it would improve investment in the economy to enable the operators to provide better services. These, of course, are altruistic arguments, and they are true. At the same time, the regulator also earns income and fees from the performance of the telcos. So if the telcos are not doing well, the operators will not earn sufficient fees. So yes, it is a fair middle ground from the perspective of the operator and the regulator. For the consumers, it's moving us further down the line. But very little option at this point.
I was a little curious, when I started hearing this, this talk around increase in tariff, and the fact that the regulator had to approve the fact that before any of the telcos could increase tariff, because here's what they were asking for: 100% increase. If you were to if everybody were to ask for 100% increase, we've experienced that already. In fact, with petrol, it was not 100% increase; it was well over 100% increase. Electricity tariff, I think we got up to 300% increase in electricity tariff. Now telcos are asking, or they were asking for 100% increase. You've talked about just how much MTN lost as a company, as an entity. When you also look at the average position of a Nigerian vis-a-vis FX, if you were to look at how much maybe you were worth yesterday vis-a-vis how much you're worth today, with what had happened with the devaluation of the naira, they're not exactly in a position to absorb all the shocks that we were seeing with all of these increases in very critical sectors: power, communications, energy. These are the areas that we have now seen this tariff. How would you say that? Because on the one hand, while the telecom companies can ask for this and do this, it certainly will have an impact on the ability of consumers to continue to be able to afford their products, particularly rural consumers. Maybe we shouldn't go there just yet. Let's even talk about the average consumer. How do you think that the average consumer is going to be able to absorb this latest shock to their spending?
Well, people would dig in and look at the spectrum of consumer behavior. So it will be your amount of disposable income, your physiological or psychological and sociological composition of different segments of consumers. Some will not be bothered. They will go on with their business as usual. Some will even spend more. But we would expect a majority of consumers to begin to adopt measures to reduce consumption so that they can balance or hopefully maintain a consistent spend in terms of cash outlay. But, the interesting component, and you're right, with the situation in Nigeria and all the major sectors and the changes we are seeing and would continue to see. And if you look at it from a consumer perspective, I'm particularly happy that the President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria, eventually agreed, at least for some time, to slow down on the implementation of the tax reform bills. Because what would have happened is that the pressure on Nigerians would have simply increased. VAT is going to be going up. Luckily for telco fees, when you buy a recharge card, the fee that the telco sets already includes VAT, and I hope they would maintain that standard going forward with a price review. So whatever price the NCC approves now is already VAT inclusive. That's the way telco fees operate. But broadly speaking, for consumers, it's tougher times ahead. From all government predictions, hopefully by 2026, 2027, hopefully, things will begin to slow down and take shape. We hope that this president would fix a number of these issues before the end of his first tenure, so that he stands a better chance to come back to office, which of course he has the privilege and opportunity to do that. But one of the arguments we would typically hear would be to compare price increases, given that it's not been done in 10, 12 years, with what's happening in other, especially developing economies. It is true that in 10 to 12 years, most developing economies have increased tariffs a couple of times, almost everybody else. But what is not true is to compare that with two indicators, for example. What is the cost, for example, of 1 gigabit of data in most developed economies? So what has happened in Nigeria now with this pronouncement by NCC is that it brings our average cost to the same level with countries, most landlocked Eastern countries in Africa, Ethiopia, Kenya, Rwanda. Of course, we are still far off from what are obtainable in South Africa, which is about $1.7. So this change would take Nigeria's costs to about $60 per 1 gigabit of data. But if you compare that with what's obtainable in 60 cents, I beg your pardon, for 1 gigabit of data. If you take that to what's obtainable in India, for example, it's still around 9 cents, 10 cents. So while India in the last 2, 3, 4 years have increased tariff, say 3, 4 times, but they are still below 10 cents. And Nigeria, we're moving from about 32 cents for 1 gigabit of data on the average to 64. So, and we know what it is with, income rate and all of that. And it will interest you to know more about that. Now, with this increase, we will be paying the same rate as United Kingdom customers. These guys are in pounds. It's easy to argue that their taxes and all of the cost component are much higher. But an average skilled person in the UK, on a dollar per dollar basis, will earn maybe 10 times what the equivalent in Nigeria is earning. But their cost profile are gradually becoming the same. Transportation, diesel, housing, now telecoms. So we are moving our cost of living to the level of so many economies, while the ability to earn is not the same. So this is the challenge that consumers will continue to face in 2025.
And it's a really big challenge indeed. I'm just a little curious because you talked about how other countries, they had been gradually increasing their own tariff. Up to where we are, where they are currently. We have not done this. Why do you think that it has taken so long for us to see this increment? Do you think that if telecom companies had been gradually increasing, would this be so much of a shock? Because all that has happened now, yes, we have seen incidences in the last 2 years thereabout that has seen an increase in many other places. But one would argue that the cost of production for some time now had been going up already for telecom companies. For instance, their base station, they power it on diesel. Diesel has been deregulated for a very long time now, and one would have thought that would have been reflected in some of their price increments, which would have been happening over time. Do you think that the NCC was being too restrictive, or did the telecom companies think that they could cope?
Well, it's a number of factors. First is that ultimately telecoms is regulated. So fixing price within certain band is determined by the regulator. And last year, the new or the current EVC of NCC passed a simplified, harmonized tariff program, which it's a good thing. NCC has been one of the flagship, in fairness to them, regulatory agencies in the country, and they continue to be among the top 3, top 5 outstanding regulatory agencies in the country. But on this one, there are certain changes that I believe the NCC needs to make. Yes, the increase should have been gradual. A 50% single leap is almost unacceptable. It's a huge leap. It's true. The conversation starting publicly and making it happen maybe 2-3 months. I think it's huge. NCC could borrow a leaf from what the electricity regulator is doing, make a 2-year incremental pronouncement, work with the operators to make that happen. And to interest you to know that why has it not happened all this while? Yes, I'll tell you a simple reason. Look, we all remember how MTN celebrated when they came into Nigeria. The financial projections that MTN made rolling out their first network was that they will recover in about 5 to 10 years or thereabout. And they broke even and began to make profits in the first year. So Nigeria and the opportunities that it presents is huge. Even today, in spite of the losses, MTN's financial report for 2020 last year, last year, 3 quarters, is still operationally. Even today, the company on its own it's profitable. So what is the challenge they are facing? It is the exchange regime policy of government. I wouldn't want to say of the current government or the previous government, but it is the sudden changes in exchange rate regime that has put MTN and most of these operators in the situation they find themselves. Now, if you look at the banks on the flip side, maybe because they are a financial institution, they took advantage of the policies, and all the banks, or majority of them, declared such huge profit from exchange rate gains that the federal government had to consider, passing a special tax on those gains. But if you look at most of the other industries, telco, manufacturing, and all of that, they don't have the expertise that financial services organizations have. So Mr. Jen took a hit from the exchange rate policy. So this is where they are losing money from. And I think it's high time that telcos also began to look at their business model. You're right. BTS, the base station cost, is the biggest single element for telcos. And if you look at it, the cost between last year, 2023, which they've declared, and 2024, more than doubled, which is reflective of the changes in exchange rate. So the question is, isn't there something they can begin to do, a newer model, a better restructuring? Shouldn't NCC begin already to sit with the telcos and look at the models they operate? Because what they've simply done is to outsource most of this functionality to other entities, which some in the industry say they're, well, let me leave the investment model and all of that. But other entities that they then subscribe. The challenge is that all this cost, or most of it, are dollar denominated.
Okay. Well,
of course, we want to dollarize the economy, but that's the situation we find ourselves.
Okay. Well, Mr. Ayemi, just one thing bothers my mind. Well, a number of things actually, but first of all, is whether or not you think the increase, this hike in telcos services will invoke inflation. If you think it will spur inflation one way or the other. And secondly, if you can put both in the same response. Part of the promise made, and that's been the story over time, that we're increasing the price, telco services prices, with the hope that we'll be able to increase or improve on QoS. Do you see that happening this time around?
I mean, cash is king, right? With the increase, the cash position and cash situation of all telcos will improve. And their cost profile would remain at existing trajectory. So definitely almost all telcos, without exception, should be able to do better. They should be able to invest more. That's why I said the argument of NCC or TruSiC, yes. Now, telco, the sector contributes about 9% to GDP at the moment. With the increase, perhaps, maybe 11, 12%. We'll see what plays out at the end of 2025. Now, direct impact on inflation. That I will leave to specialist economics. But this is what I would say. I believe that disposable income is what would make people determine what they do with phone calls. Today, about 55% of telco revenues is in data. Only about 30-35% is in voice calls. And the utilization, people would argue that almost 40-50% of data utilization in Nigeria is for frivolous and some P-word use that are not for real economic activities. So will people adjust their consumption to reflect the new cost pattern? Or if people maintain their cost consumption levels for data and voice, I see the impact on inflation not to be that significant, personal view, given that people would prioritize other more critical spending to making calls and using data. But quality of service, yes, it's hopeful that would step up, but it will not happen by default. The telco has to be deliberate. I mean, the regulator this time has to be deliberate and intentional in monitoring what needs to happen. And I wouldn't even take the bet on quality of service. I would expect the regulator to give Nigerians more tangible things. For example, when most people call public institutions and call public services, they pay to make those calls. If you have an issue with your bank and you're calling to resolve the issue, you're most likely calling on a line that you are paying for. So the regulator, NCC, can sit with the telcos and say, okay, we're allowing this increase. What if you reduce your fee on inbound calls to businesses and public institutions, so that people can be encouraged, these entities can be encouraged to adopt toll-free lines. If they adopt toll-free lines and the fees that the entity who subscribe to the telcos for these lines is also reduced significantly as part of the broader negotiation, it gives people some relief. So at least if you are having to make critical mandatory calls to hospitals, to federal institutions, to state institutions, to local government, to banks, to all public institutions and corporate, your cost of doing that is reduced. So if you don't want to choose, as Maokwe would not compromise, and I would not compromise, if you then choose to spend 6 hours calling your partner or other social calls, I mean, that's up to you. But mandatory calls that people need to make can be reduced if they make those interventions.
Are you hopeful? I mean, since you say you're hopeful on the issue of QoS, quality of service, as a good number of people who have been told that we tried to reach you, we couldn't reach you, that quality of service, particularly of calls, is a huge concern. That's the basis of that question. So what's the assurance we have, for instance, that there is going to be any significant infrastructure improvement in rural areas, for instance? We are still struggling with 5G in urban Nigeria, and I'm not sure we have 2G all across the country at this point. So do you see this increase affecting anything significantly in terms of infrastructure for telecommunication?
Well, again, there are no assurances, but this is what I'll say. As this increase coming, the telco's ability to pay their regulatory fees will improve. So on the regulator side alone, for example, I think in MTN's book, they have about between 70 or 90 billion naira in regulatory fees. Hopefully, all of that money is going to NCC. MTN paying regulatory fees should all go to NCC in last year. And that's as a third quarter. So if their performance improves, their payments to regulator would improve. And there is also a special intervention fund, USPF, that the NCC and the Ministry of Digital Economy manages. And this is also largely from profit from operators. So as all of this happen, the ability now of government through NCC and the Ministry of Digital Economy to provide interventions, which they already do it, by the way. USPF provides so many interventions in higher institutions and all of that to improve broadband penetration. I think the Minister of Digital Economy is pursuing this ambitious goal to roll out 90,000 kilometers of fiber. Well, I wish him all the luck. The fund for it has begun to come in from what we see in the news. Again, hopefully, before they leave office, we will see traction. So the increase, USPF funding certainly should increase better than before the increase. Regulatory payment to NCC should increase before this price change. So putting all that together, their ability as regulator to intervene and as government to intervene, it's definitely enhanced. Now, on the telco side, this is my position. All regulated entities, you have to assume as a regulator that they would not on their own do everything they should do to improve quality of service. So the only guarantee, the only entity that can give a guarantee is NCC, because they have to improve and sharpen their regulatory oversight and measures to ensure this happens. And they need to make certain commitment. So NCC has to come up beyond saying that it will improve quality of service. So they should make specific public pronouncement that call drop rates will change from this current level to this current level, and then hold the industry accountable to those standards. So perhaps that would then increase my level of certainty to say this will happen. But surely there will be some improvement.
If you can intervene on this one, I wanted to ask you about rural penetration, because that's one of the areas that the federal government is also looking towards. How do you think this core tariff hike will affect rural penetration and the ability of rural people to be able to afford their services?
Affordability for rural people would remain what it is. They would not be able to afford it. We wait to see how, at the end of the government investment and, for example, the fiber route, if government continue aggressive policy inducement that would enable differentiated tariff by the telcos, for example, government could sit down, regulator could sit down with the telcos and say, in rural areas, we want you to maintain the current fee. If possible, even reduce them. And in urban areas, excuse me, in urban areas, yeah, go ahead with the increase. So these are some of the measures they can take. But as it is today, unless those positive policy inducements are done by the government through the regulators, the telco will charge their standard tariff everywhere. They've done certain promotions. For example, a number of the telcos have done...
Annie, I'm afraid we're totally out of time. I mean, I think I'm going to take your last sentence, that perhaps they can do a differentiated tariff, or we'll see if that will apply in this particular instance. We have to thank you so much for your intervention on the conversation this morning. Mr. Bosun Ayeni is the CEO of Compumetrics, and he joined us via Zoom here in Abuja. Thank you so much for being a part of the program.
Thank you for having me. Have a nice day.
And that's where we wrap up the conversation this beautiful Tuesday morning. Thank you to our viewers for being a part of it. You can send us a message on any of the topics that have been of interest to you. Thank you for watching. I'm Malpa Ogun Yusuf. Have a great day.
Ayo Makinde, do have a productive day.